The Hobbit Trilogy. Folks, we are going back to Middle-earth in 4K Ultra HD. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you have an opinion on the Hobbit Trilogy, whether you love it or hate it. I'm not here to tell you whether you should love it or hate it or somewhere in between. I'll give you my 2 cents on it during my final recommendation later in this video. But for right now, we're just going to focus on this 4K set and whether it's a worthy successor to the 1080p version that we got on the Blu-rays. I don't have as much Hobbit stuff. Where are you? First, we'll start off with what's included. Again, we have a slipcase with some really nice artwork that pairs perfectly with the Lord of the Rings set that I covered in my last video. Inside, you'll find 6 discs. Now note, that's different than the Lord of the Rings trilogy where we had 9 discs. In The Hobbit, we get 3 theatrical discs as well as 3 extended discs. So the extended editions are not broken up over 2 discs like they were on Lord of the Rings. Now, I didn't mention this in my Lord of the Rings review, but there are no special features whatsoever in these sets. There's no appendices. I've had some people ask me about that. No appendices, no bonus features of any kind. It's just the movies in 4K. And I should note that the appendices, if you notice going back to your Blu-ray sets, those are DVDs as well. So I think those have been maxed out in terms of their quality on the DVD format. So personally, I'm not too broken up about the fact that there's no appendices or the same bonus features that we've gotten in previous sets with these. Now, since we are talking about the Hobbit trilogy, it's worth noting that these do not come with the 3D versions or in 48 frames per second as they were shown in theaters, if you recall. And just like with the Lord of the Rings set, you get digital copies. Now, that includes both the theatrical and the extended editions in 4K. Now let's talk about the video quality. Right out of the gate, in An Unexpected Journey, I noticed that the shots in Bag End definitely looked different. They looked more sharp, more clear, and part of that is these films were made 10 years apart from Lord of the Rings, and part of that is the technology was totally different that they were using. As I said in my Lord of the Rings review, those films were shot on film. The Hobbit films, however, were shot in 5K and on digital, so the image looks different. There's not as much grain. The image is crisper, a little sharper, and it just has a more digital look to it. But that difference has existed as long as these movies have, so that isn't really news. Now, I also mentioned in my last review, I talked a lot about the Lord of the Rings restoration process from the original film negatives. The Hobbit was restored by going back to its original raw footage since these were digital. But both sets, this is the best quality that you've ever seen these movies in. Now, these movies, as it's well documented, have much more CG going on than in the Lord of the Rings films. And I've seen these movies quite a bit, so I was kind of curious how this CG would look in this particular 4K version. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised. I feel like it meshed better with the live action people and props and things like that. And while it's not as seamless as some of the practical effects that we get in Lord of the Rings, I personally didn't think that it stuck out as much as I previously remembered it. A couple specific examples that I had were when the Eagles and Beorn arrive at the Battle of the Five Armies. The CG looked really good. I thought the attack by the Eagles looked great, and Beorn attacking the orcs looked great. Also, Bomber's crazy barrel acrobatics, whatever you call it. It's still insane, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't look quite as cartoony as I remembered it looking. Now, there's 2 very specific moments in these movies that I really wanted to see remastered in 4K and to see what the CG looked like in this new version. These 2 shots just always screamed video game cutscene to me. The first comes in Desolation of Smaug, and there's an overhead shot of Smaug thrashing around, and it always just looked like such a video game shot to me. The second moment is in Battle of the Five Armies when Thranduil is riding his elk and he decapitates like half a dozen orcs, and his elk gets shot by arrows and collapses, and Thranduil does this roll. And this shot, specifically when Thranduil is rolling, it just seemed like it came from a video game or something. That being said, as you can imagine, I was very attuned to these particular shots when I was watching these films. And I can honestly say I was really pleased with the Thranduil shot in particular. I had to rewind it a couple times just to make sure that I wasn't being biased because I was in awe of the 4K and the HDR and everything. I was so pleasantly surprised by this that I actually pulled out my Blu-ray version to double check myself to make sure I wasn't misremembering it. And I can honestly say it looks much better in 4K. It flows, it fits with the rest of the CG in that scene. It looked fantastic. I don't know what they did differently, but it looked great. The Smaug shot, however, I thought still looked a little bit off, but possibly not to the same degree that it was before. Because these movies are so much more recent, I wasn't sure right off the bat whether this was a huge leap forward. And it wasn't until I got out the Blu-rays that especially the HDR and the color treatment really stuck out to me. The colors are more rich. The flames when Smaug is attacking Lake Town are just fantastic. There's just so much more detail in the shots. Just like with Lord of the Rings, there was things that I had never noticed before that I picked up on in this 4K version. There's patterns on clothes and textures on armor and helmets and stuff like that. I remember admiring the rust on the jail cell bars when Bard is imprisoned, for example. The landscape shots look fantastic. I remember in Dale and in Lake Town specifically, looking at these shots, admiring them, and trying to see how much fine detail I could make out in these big landscape shots. I remember the scene in the High Fells during the Desolation of Smaug Extended Edition. There was just a lot more detail in the blacks that I could make out, whereas before on my old copies, they just kind of looked really dark. I didn't see much detail there, whereas with this new color with the HDR, it just really stands out that there's a lot more texture, a lot more to be seen there. Like I said, I saw things that I had never really noticed before, like for example, when arrows are hitting the dwarves' barrels as they're riding down the river. And speaking of the barrel ride, one of the things that's not so great is that there's still those couple shots that look like they could be GoPro footage. I've never really figured out what's going on with those, but they look like GoPro footage to me. And again, the difference between this and the rest of the shots, it might be toned down in this cut somewhat, but you can definitely still tell on those couple shots that something's different about them. For me, one of the biggest wow moments, aside from Smaug burning Lake Town and some of the more obvious things like that, is the moment when Smaug is covered with gold and flees from the mountain. It's just a few shots, but the way he moves and the way the HDR treats him in his golden form just looked absolutely gorgeous to me. Next, we'll talk a bit about the audio. Honestly, I think I noticed the soundtrack a little less in these films, and part of that is because the themes aren't as recognizable or iconic to me personally. Aside from the Misty Mountains theme or the Mirkwood theme or the Lake Town theme, I really like the Lake Town theme actually. Those would be the few exceptions where I really noticed the soundtrack coming through. As I've chatted with folks in the comments on my Lord of the Rings 4K review, I've mentioned that I'm probably going to upgrade to a sound system sometime soon. And honestly, I think the Hobbit trilogy did more to convince me of that even than the Lord of the Rings trilogy did. Right off the bat in Unexpected Journey, the dwarves singing their Misty Mountain song, it's just so good. I can't wait to hear that in surround sound. And likewise for when Smaug is taunting Bilbo and that whole scene with Smaug and Bilbo. I just think Smaug's voice is perfect for a surround sound system. It sounded great on my soundbar, but I'm definitely going to be upgrading to a sound system after hearing these. So with that, we'll talk a bit about the films and my final recommendation. Like I said earlier, I'm not seeking to change anyone's mind on how they feel about the Hobbit films. Personally, I still really enjoy them, and I love that they give me a chance to escape back into Middle-earth. Don't get me wrong, you know, if you've watched any of my videos for any amount of time, you'll have picked up on there's certain moments that I do kind of roll my eyes at. But that being said, I feel like there's a lot to love here. The casting is great, you know, Thorin, Bilbo, Balin, and Smaug in particular, they're all fantastic in these movies. Howard Shore's music is always great. You know, scenes like Riddles in the Dark with Gollum and Bilbo and Inside Information with Smaug and Bilbo, and pretty much any part of these movies where Bilbo's heart is on full display, they just make me love these movies for what they are. And while these movies certainly warrant some criticism, I also don't think that they always get the credit that they deserve either. Like I said, you've probably already made up your mind on how you feel about these Hobbit movies, and I'm sure the comments currently reflect that, even if people haven't made it this far into the video. Again, with this set, like Lord of the Rings, there's the question of whether you should get this now or wait for the Ultimate Collector's Edition that will have all 6 films in summer of 2021. I think for most people, this decision is going to come down to what you decide to do with Lord of the Rings. So if I decided to spring for Lord of the Rings, then most likely I'm also going to pick up The Hobbit as well. I like these movies enough that I would want to have the full set. I might not watch them as often as I do Lord of the Rings. Spoiler alert, I don't watch anything as much as I do Lord of the Rings. But like I said, I still love them in their own way, and I'm still going to put them on from time to time. There's still a lot of Middle-earth greatness there to enjoy. But if you enjoy these movies like I do, I can tell you that this is certainly the best way that you're going to be able to watch them. The bottom line when it comes to this set, these are reference quality video and audio. These are the kind of movies that you put on just to show off to your friends. With the 4K, the HDR, and the better sound quality, it's definitely a worthy upgrade over Blu-ray. Once again, I want to say a big thank you to Warner Brothers. They sent me both trilogies so that I could watch them and review them and share my thoughts with you guys. If you're interested in purchasing either of these, I did put links in the description. If you purchase through those links, that does help out the channel as well. So let me know what you guys think of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit in 4K. Hit me up on Twitter or here in the comments. I really want to know what you guys think. I'm genuinely interested to hear other people's opinions on this. Again, please hit that subscribe button so you get a dose of Middle-earth each and every week. I'm going to get back to work on my next Tolkien Explained video that comes out on Saturday, or maybe I'll watch Fellowship in 4K one more time first. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.